We're delighted to welcome the President of the Astrological Lodge of London, Ajose. Israel is a teacher and consultant in astrology and tarot and combines traditional, medieval, modern psychological and Vedic techniques. And his studies and practices also include cosmology, mythology, occult sciences, philosophy, Kabbalah, shamanism, and divination. And tonight, Israel will be discussing how the moon in our natal charts encompasses all of our life's experiences and stories. So over to you, Israel.
Thank you very much. I'd like to say good evening to each and everybody everyone here from all around the world. It's a pleasure to be here and a great honor. I'd like to thank Graham and the part of the Seven Aquarius astrology community. Great to be here. So this evening I'm going to be speaking on moon signatures, patterns, and the cosmic oracle. Very often, what I do find with the moon, is sometimes it can be somewhat a bit overlooked, and especially in the last probably 5 to 10 years. We've been getting much more into traditional astrology. It's kind of opened sort of like a new world, but it broadened my vocabulary, so to speak. So this evening I want to show you how, I've even dealing with clients, I've found there's been many a times where the consultation's gone on for over an hour and I'm still on the moon and I haven't even touched on the other bits yet. And it really can show many different aspects of our being that we may somewhat, we may not be aware of, or we may overlook it in some kind of way. We often gravitate towards the moon, that's our emotions. And I'm not saying it's not that, but I'm just saying that the moon perhaps maybe have a lot more to offer than we often recognize. So hence the title, The Moon Signatures, Patterns, and Cosmic Oracle. So I'll be looking at various aspects of moon. The moon in traditional astrology especially was actually seen as just as powerful as the sun. It's quite interesting if we go to the Asian cultures amongst the Vedic astrology. If any of you have been to India or you're discussing with a Vedic astrologer, I can assure you before they ask you your sun sign, they will ask you your moon sign first. They'll probably ask you for your ascendant first, your lagna, which was pretty much the same actually also in Western astrology. This idea of sun sign astrology it's not even 100 years at best. The idea where somebody would say, what's your star sign or sun sign? And we would say, oh, I'm a Libra, or I'm a Capricorn. The traditional way would be, what's your sun sign? You would say your rising sign first. Then you would give your sun sign and then moon sign, the big three, as we all know. But into cultures, how many people know their moon signs? Very few. Everybody knows their sun signs, and of course a lot of that is due to the popularization of sun signs and the magazines and so on. So I'm not necessarily having a go, but I think it's rather interesting how the moon has been somewhat sort of it's there, it's overlooked in some kind of way, or people are not even aware that there is a moon sign. So for me, the moon has just as much weight, and because she is a planet of the night, she seems to hold a mysterious aspect of who we are and to our life story, as well as we will see this evening. So these are just a few images that I've just put up. I just like to get that lunar energy coming in. So as we all know, we are going around the sun and the moon is orbiting us on Earth. That is the difference between planets, sun and moon. So planets always orbit suns, whereas moons always orbit planets. So that's all something I'm sure we all are aware of. Now, there is a technique known as the 7 ages of man, and they speak about when we are incarnating into this physical world. There is a school of that that suggests that we stop off at all of the 7 traditional planets or 7 major planets, and we stop there and we pick up a piece or a portion or an aspect of that planet, depending on where it's going to be in our natal chart. And then we move on to the next planet and so on and so forth. And we end up, obviously, the last one being the moon. As you are all aware, if you are familiar with it, this order of the planetary order that we're seeing here is known as the Chaldean order, and it's based on the planetary speeds. So, you know, Saturn is the slowest, then Jupiter, then Mars, then Sun, then Venus, then Mercury, then the moon being the fastest. So it's going from the slowest to the fastest, of course. And again, with the sun, we have to remember it's relative, it's really Earth, because we're the ones orbiting the sun, but we don't need to get into that technicality just about now. But the point I want to make is that the last planet, which is the fastest planet before we incarnate into this world, is actually the moon. And this maybe start to begin to tell us something about what the moon has in store for us. These 7 ages of man indicate particular times of our life where each particular planet will govern a number of years. But it's quite interesting because the first 4 years of our life is governed by the moon, and then it goes on to Mercury, which is 10 years, then Venus, then Sun, then Mars, then Jupiter, then Saturn. But the emphasis I want to work with here, I'm not necessarily talking about technique, is one of a great technique to actually utilize and incorporate into astrological work, but it's the first 4 years. And I think this tells us something about the moon, as the moon is the planet that really gives us our foundation of life. And all the other planets are essentially building or are built on top of that moon. The moon is setting the premise for everything. It's setting the tone, essentially, of our life, and the other planets are adding onto that. So it's rather interesting that how the moon is now forming the foundational years. When we're in that womb, we're soaking up, because when child is in the womb, there is no separation between child and mother. The child, we are feeding off the mother. The mother is protecting us in the womb, in the sac. We are contained there during those 9 to 10 months. And even when we are just born, we still rely upon mother. We expect mother to feed us. One of the first things that they do when the child comes out of the womb is they hand the child over to the mother, and the mother will proceed to breastfeed. Again, so we see that nurturing, from the get-go. So it forms that bond, a bond. There are going to be different types of bonds depending, obviously, where our moon are, and we're going to be looking at that again this evening. So there's something about the moon which is connected with our roots in many ways. It's the foundation. Every tree has roots. The roots are the foundation. They are the premise that is keeping it's on which the tree grows and blossoms its fruits and leaves, is actually relying on those particular roots. It's getting its water, its nutrients, all from those roots. The roots are the ones that are providing that. So these are a few keywords here. I'm sure we're all familiar with some of these keywords that can allow us to understand who and what the moon is, and how the moon can tend to function, and what it is for us. It's mother, first and foremost. We know that. And when we speak about mother, we have mother on many different levels. When we speak of mother, of course, we first relate to our biological mother, but mother can also be, Mother Earth, for example. The state, the country, sometimes they refer to the country as the nanny state, and so on and so forth. So that's, the many aspects of mother. Um, Nurturing, food, it's all connected to our moon. The kind of foods that we crave or we are attracted to, the kind of foods that make us feel like, I like a bit of that. Are you a savory person? Are you a sweet person? These are all going to be dependent on where our moon is in the chart. The moon is to do with our sense of security. It's the container, it's the body. It's the planet that represents the physical body. It's the moon. The most physiological planet of them all is the moon. Or our body is something that contains a number of things, blood, organs, and so on and so forth. So we're coming back here with the moon. The moon represents the matrix, the system. Mother again, womb, the emotions, home, house. So it's quite interesting how the moon is also connected to the kind of home that we live in. If you look and take a close look at your moon and aspects to your moon and the sign that the moon is in, and look at the nature of your home, and take a good look, and look at the home you were raised in, because although we may think, oh well, I've moved out of my mother and father's house and I've got my own house now, you actually find themes repeating themselves. I thought I was truly cut away from my mother and father, and it just clicked, like, hold on a minute, no, I'm recreating the same thing. I've just added a few bits and pieces, but this is the same house, the same themes running through it again. So we project our moon onto our houses, onto our homes, onto our personal homes. There's something about what we experienced in the wombs of our mothers, what we experienced, how we were nurtured in those early years, which we take and we project that. The moon stores it. The moon is a storehouse, not only for our emotions, but also for our memory. And the moon stores that, and we project that onto our homes later on. Maybe we might leave home in our late teens, if not maybe in our 20s, sometimes even 30s. But whenever we do, we will take that lunar experience and we will project it onto the home. Moon represents the instincts, the habits, our ability to be receptive. It's the past. She represents that which is ancestral. She connects us with the ancestral realm. Heritage, roots, the unconscious. The moon is our anchor. That which anchors us here on planet Earth is the moon. So we can start to really look at some of these words, and it really starts to open up doorways and also questions, as a matter of fact, in terms of what, with this moon. It's not just our emotions. Yes, it is our emotions or our emotional reactions, but it encompasses something far more than that. Again, memory. This is a word that I often find with the Vedic astrologers. They will often say, the moon is your memory. When I first heard that, and that Mercury. And yes, Mercury is, rational memory, logical memory, yes. But the emotional memory, the storehouse memory is the moon. So, and these are things that we would never not readily, I often find in Western astrology, we may associate that moon with the mind. So it's quite interesting. I think it's quite interesting when these people get drunk and they, I used to work as a doorman, did a bit of security in my time, and it was just amazing how to see, people just stumbling home, and they're somewhat drunk, and I'm thinking, how are you going to make it? And the moon is a planet that is associated with being drunk. Hence why one of the reasons why they say you don't want to wake up with a hangover in the morning, drink a glass of water before you go to bed, So it's water. The moon rules the waters, as we know. She rules the ebb and flow, the high tides, the low tides. The human body, as we know it, is 70% water. Planet Earth is mostly water. So again, we're back to the moon. So moon is very interesting. Just a few little, we all know this, the moon represents our emotions and need for security. It represents our early environment and particularly the way we experience mother. It shows our ability to be sensitive to the environment and to both give and receive emotions. The moon is related to instincts and is profoundly connected to the personal unconscious and all the habitual behavior that is looked after by this mysterious part of ourselves. The moon shows how we instinctively react to protect ourselves and others. The sign the moon is in shows the specific way we react to ourselves, we react, and the kind of emotions, needs we have. Moon goes through all 12 signs in a month. The moon sign's influence is at least as powerful as the sun. So that's interesting here. Yeah, you know, this person quotes here, it's at least as powerful as the sun, showing specific habitual and environmental needs, as well as ingrained reaction styles. The house the moon is in shows the particular area in actual life to which we become attached and increased feelings of security. This area is where we are most vulnerable and defensive. However, it is also this area where we experience the greatest growth and show the greatest concern for others. Aspects of the moon show specific emotional experiences which affect our psychological nature. These aspects are integrated into our emotional nature and give specific reaction patterns and habits. So much of this we know, it's somewhat basic, but I also like to just read it because sometimes it will just stimulate parts of the brain and just opens up things. And you know, that I like to promote thought. So this again tells us something again more about the moon. But again, moon is more than that, as we will see. This is from Bertius Valens, and one of the traditional astrologers, and this is something that he quotes, who was around 175 before the Common Era CE. He says here, the moon is born of the reflection of the solar light, and possessing counterfeit light signifies in the nativity, in a nativity, a person's physical life, the body, which I've mentioned, the mother, we know that, conception. That's interesting. You want to know how you were conceived? Look at your moon. Form, so our physical form. Appearance, it's the goddess. Living together or lawful marriage, so moon is connected with marriage. Very often, of course, we look at 7th house, Venus for those things, but moon is also involved. Nurse, so she's the nurse, night nurse. Older sibling. How many of you would even think or consider of looking at the moon for your older siblings? It's quite interesting. When I looked in my chart, I have 6 sisters, 6 older siblings. Isn't that interesting? And out of all 6 of them, the one that I am most closest to is a Taurus, and I have moon in Taurus. Coincidence? I think not. But it's quite interesting. There's other aspects of it that I also see in terms of where my moon is placed and stuff. I see it. That sister, out of all 6 of them, it's just the one that seems to pick her. So I think that's rather interesting. Look at your moon and look at your older siblings, if you do have any, because you may be the older sibling, you know, especially if you've got moon in Capricorn or something like that. That's a strong likelihood. Housekeeping, the queen, mistress of the house, possessions, fortune. So the moon governs fortune. Now, we would often look at the 2nd house and Jupiter and Venus, but the moon has a lot more may have a lot more to say about our fortune more than these planets. City, you know, of course, it's the people, isn't it? A gathering of the masses. Gains, expenditures, home, boats, travel, wandering. since it does not hold straight due to Cancer, the crab, because obviously the moon rules Cancer. Part of the body she rules is the left eye, stomach, breast, the breath, interesting, the spleen, membranes, and marrow, from which it produces dropsy of substances. She rules silver, glass. She's of a nocturnal sect, light green in color and salty in taste. So these are things we would not necessarily readily, some of these things we wouldn't necessarily associate with the moon, which is quite interesting. Hence why it says she can and often does provide more, as we will see. Without the matter of separation and application of the moon, neither their longevity, nor brevity of life, nor sickness, nor injury, nor health, nor misfortune, nor fame, nor obscurity, nor maliceness, nor weakness is established in the nativity. This is written by Paulus. Now, what he's talking about here, or what he's referring to, which we will talk about a little bit later, he's talking about the moon aspects, lunar aspects. And he's talking about if the moon is void, which we'll get into a little bit later, because very rarely, very, very rarely, but some people are born with void of course moons. And just to point out, there is a difference, and I'll probably mention it later, there is a difference between a void of course moon in a natal chart and a void of course moon in a horary chart. So we shall look at that. So things that we want to be looking at, we want to look at the sect of the moon, speed. Some of these things may be somewhat a bit alien to you, especially if you not have any awareness of traditional astrology. Moon phase, moon aspects, one of the major ones I really want to be looking at, the moon strength, and the void of course moon. So when we're looking at the moon, we have to look at, is she part of the ruler of sect, which we will go into, her speed, sign, house, moon phase, aspects, and all of these will contribute to all of those things that I have previously read out, but essentially to the essence of one's life. It will indicate all of those things, as we will see. And I've got a few examples. Very quickly, sect. What is sect? Very simple. It's based on daytime charts or nighttime charts. So in traditional astrology, one of the first things they would look at is, are you born during the day or during the night? What makes a daytime chart or a nighttime chart? If the sun is above the horizon, so if the sun has come up over the ascendant, or before it is set, before the descendant, then it's a daytime chart. If it's under the descendant and under the ascendant, it's a nocturnal chart. So it's the sun that actually marks the timing of the day and nighttime, or whether it's a diurnal or nocturnal. And we have planets that are on the daytime team, which is the sun, Jupiter, and Saturn. They represent the daytime. And the nighttime team, which is the moon, Venus, and Mars. And Mercury can swing either way, depending on, there are various schools of thought on this, as to whether if he rises before the sun or after the sun, or which particular planet he is making an aspect to, is closest to, if it's sun or moon, and it will indicate whether it's a daytime Mercury or nighttime Mercury. But on a simple level, Mercury swings both ways, as Robert Hand kindly put it. So we have the daytime team and the nighttime team, of course. So before we get into that, so that's the first thing. So what is this about? What is the sect about? Well, the sect indicates that if it's a daytime chart, then the sun will tend to have more power. If it's a nighttime chart, then the moon tends to have more of a relative say in terms of what's going on in the chart. She is the sect ruler. And what I will often find is that people who are born in the night, I'm not saying people who are born in the day do not have, of course you have a moon, and of course you have emotions. But what I will often find is that people who are born in the night, the lunar qualities, so to speak, tend to be more readily accessible to them, just as people who are born in the day. The sun, the solar energy tends to be something more readily accessible. It doesn't mean that people who are born in the night haven't got a sun. Of course, they've got a sun, but it's in the night. We're talking about the planet that loves to be out. Without it, there would be no day. What's it doing below the horizon? Well, of course, it has to go below the horizon, but it's not in a place where it can shine, can it? So that's the lunar's time. So that is something that is very, very interesting. So when you're looking at your charts, always take into account, is it daytime or is it nighttime? The moon will often tend to be more stronger in a nighttime chart. So that is one of the ways of how the traditional people approach it. So set becomes very, very important indeed, amongst other things too. Now we look at the moon's speed. Now, who the hell looks at the moon's speed? Do you know how to look at the moon's speed? So as it says, the moon's relative speed shows in a native's perceptual capabilities how a person processes information, whether his or her perceptions are alert, fast moon, or deliberate, slow moon. Because it averages, so on average, the moon is about 13 degrees 10 minutes to 13 degrees 37 per day in a 24-hour day. We will define a native's perception to be alert if the moon is moving faster than this on the day of birth, and deliberate if a moon was moving more slowly than this on average speed. Again, this is the average speed in a 24 hours. If it's slow, then again, it's going to indicate a slow moon. There's ways to do this on, maybe when it comes to questions and answers, they are actually moon speed calculators that you can get on the internet. For those of you who do have solar fire, it's actually on solar fire, and I can show you an example later on for those of you who may not know how to get that. But and it does it for all the planets actually. It's not just for the moon, but it will indicate and show you the different speeds, which is quite interesting. Because speed of a planet is important. How fast is it going? And again, for people who tend to have a fast moon, what tends to happen is they are very good at recovering from certain emotional experiences, whereas people who will tend to have a slow moon, they take a slower time to process certain emotional particular circumstances. There's meant to be 4 major ways of looking at the moon's speed. And you can look at your charts and see which one of these essentially applies to you. If Mercury is behind the sun and you've got a fast moon, it indicates the native has a sharp mind, is observant and is logical, observes situations quickly, and then processes the information carefully. If Mercury is ahead of the sun, meaning if it rises before, so I'll show you an example in a moment. If it's ahead of the sun and it's a slow moon, perception is slow and deliberate, and the mind reacts quickly on these impressions. So these two tend to be somewhat more balanced. Here we have the anxious. So if the Mercury is ahead of the sun and it's a fast moon, native jumps to conclusions too readily, too reactive, because there's an anxiousness there. And we have the deliberate. Mercury is behind the sun and it's a slow moon. The native receives and processes information deliberately and slowly. So those are the things that we have to indicate. I do apologize for that noise. Hopefully it stops. See, I'm away, you see, so I'm in a hotel. I was promised it was going to be quiet, but obviously Mercury retrograde. But it's gone now. I think a few people just getting a bit sloppy. Okay, so here's a chart. For example, many of you, I'm sure, are familiar with this chart. Now, first and foremost, we can see Mercury here. Mercury is in Aries here at 4 degrees Aries, and here is the sun at 0 degrees of Taurus. So we can see here that as the sun goes this way through the 24-hour day, as he's carried through the houses, Mercury is going to rise before the sun. Okay, he's ahead of the sun because he's going to rise before the sun. So this is a Mercury before the sun. And if we go to the chart here, we can see where it says moon, this person's moon has a slow moon. Okay, so this person has a slow moon. So what kind of mind is this have? So Mercury is ahead of the sun, it's going to rise before, and the moon is slow. So what does it say? Perception is slow and deliberate, and the mind reacts quickly on these impressions. So that gives us an indication of how the moon works in this instance. Now, this is the chart of, oh, there we go, Queen. I'm sure we're all familiar with the chart. Oh, what's happening there? We're all familiar with the chart of the Queen by now. And it's quite interesting, if you ever watch the Queen, or if you've read anything about the Queen, and if you watch her when she's giving her Christmas speeches and New Year's speeches, and watch the way in terms of how she communicates, there is something there that really says something about that speed of the moon. And of course, she's born in the night also as well. So in her chart, she is ruler by sect. And we'll also be looking a little bit later again in terms of how aspects work and so on and so forth. Essential dignities. I know many people, I know it can look a little bit laborious and what's all this, and we just deal with planets in their own sign or exaltations and that's it, or planets in their fall. But essential dignities, again, when I started incorporating them into my practice, I found they were extremely useful. It sharpened my astrology. I was able to make much more better, accurate predictions, and my forecasting came on point. So I urge that, you know, if you can, to incorporate it. It can seem a little bit laborious at first, but after a while, it all starts to sink in and you start to get it. And the essential dignities essentially is a particular way of looking at how certain planets in your chart, sometimes you may have planets in your chart that are weak, but they may not be as weak as you think they are. They have a bit of dignity to them. And vice versa. Sometimes planets look very strong, but sometimes they may not be as strong as you think they are because, again, placements in the where they are in the chart. So essential dignities is something that I definitely would advise. Now, when it comes to the moon, it's quite simple. We know the domicile, or the sign for the moon, or as the traditionalists would say, the house of the moon is Cancer. The antithesis, or where she's debilitated, is Capricorn. She's exalted in Taurus, and she has her fall, or as the ancients would put it, depressed, quite heavy word that, isn't it, in Scorpio. So we're all aware in terms of where the moon is, has a bit of an advantage, and where she may find it a little bit somewhat challenging, depending if she's in Capricorn or if she's in Scorpio. But again, if we go back to the essential dignities, you actually find that moon in Capricorn, she is one of the triplicity rulers, for those of you who do with triplicity. And also when she's in Scorpio, she's also one of the triplicity rulers. So sometimes, even though the moon is in her fall or in detriment, she's not actually as bad as sometimes we may think she is. She's got some dignity there. So not all is lost. There can still be something that can be salvaged for any of you who may have Capricorn in the moon in Capricorn or moon in Scorpio and think that's it, my moon's doomed. Far from it. And then we look at the houses, and again, we also have what's known as the houses of joy, which I think is rather interesting. And when we look at the house of joy, since I'm speaking about the moon and focusing on the moon, we notice here that the house of joy for the moon is the third house. Now that is very interesting. And I feel this is where also the connections to siblings come in, because the third house is the house of siblings. So this is where the signification of the moon representing siblings where there's been this tendency, especially with modern astrology, where they assign Aries to the first house, and they assign Mars and Aries to the first house, and Taurus, Venus to the second house, and Mercury, Gemini to the third house. So there's been this thing about looking at Mercury for your siblings. You may actually find that the moon may actually provide more information and more accurate information in regards of one's siblings, in the chart. But the moon has a house of joy in the third, Venus in the fifth, Mars has his house of joy in the sixth house, the sun is in the ninth, Jupiter in the 11th, Saturn in the 12th, and Mercury has his house of joy in the first house. So the third house was originally the house, well, it still is, house of siblings, but also traveling. It's quite interesting. Ninth house is travel, but essentially there's something about that ninth and third house axis that is connected with travel. Yes, the house is somewhat long distance travel. There is something about broadening one's horizons that is ninth house orientated. And that's what, it's also known as the house of God, or higher education. It deals with things like universities and things like that. Universities, because universities meant to be the place that broadens our perspective on life to some degree. So the sun holds that is the sun's house of joy. But when we look at the opposite house, which is the third house, this now belongs to the moon. It's the house of the goddess. It's the house of learning, traveling, siblings. There's so many, if you look at many of the traditional interpretations of the third house, you think, what the hell is that doing there? And you may actually find that third house may be connected more actually with elements of travel than actually the ninth in some kind of way. So it's quite interesting. We'll probably touch on that maybe a bit later if we have a little bit of time, but it's rather interesting how the moon there has her joy in the in the houses. So again, depending where or what house our moon is in, essentially that's the particular area of life, because that's what the houses represent, right? They represent that area of life where we're going to meet that archetype and the nature of that particular planet. Then I find what is very useful also as well, that also adds additional information, is the phases. And we understand the lunar phases from the new moon to the full moon and back round again. We have a new moon. We've got a new moon solar eclipse coming up next week in Gemini. I'm sure you're all aware of that. But right now the moon is, coming. It's round about there, reaching round, of course we had the full moon eclipse last week, didn't we? So it's coming back round. It's roughly around the third quarter or something. Going to start to wane and make its way to that new moon period. So it's quite interesting to be aware of which particular lunar phase one is actually born under. Are you were you born between the new moon and full moon, or between the full moon and new moon? It says something. So these are the 8 phases in which somebody can or will be born under. Dane Rudra, I'm sure many of you may have his book. If you don't, I quite like Dane Rudra, but of all his books, this is the one that really spoke to me. I suppose I'm being a little bit biased as well, because I'm, obviously, I'm Cancer rising, so of course I'm going to gravitate towards moon. It's my ruling, my chart ruler. But it was a book that I felt really resonated and made a lot of sense. If you haven't got it, I would urge you to get it, because it does shed a light on perspective of the moon based on the cycle in which one is born. And he expresses how people who are born this new moon there's something like new energy about them. People who are born in the crescent moon, there's something like a claim of possessions, and they're struggling to move forward. And here is where that first quarter is where the active personality starts to take place. And then when it starts to somewhat coming up to that full moon stage, people who are born in that, they evaluate in their expression and analyzing and trying to make something perfect, coming up to that full moon. And then after the full moon, then it fulfills, it illuminates, it fulfills. There's something people who are born on that full moon who really get out there and do something, a little bit like Donald Trump, who was born on a full moon eclipse also as well, interestingly enough. So there's something about that, just people who are born just after the full moon. They want to clarify their purpose. Here is where they want to distribute their values and disseminate. The last quarter will tend to deal with revising one's thinking or reorientate, their direction in life, whereas the last quarter will tend to mutate conceptions and distill and transform energies. But if you read his book, he goes much more into detail about these particular phases and what they mean and the kinds of parts of the person's personality, depending on the the person's phase in which they were born under. There's also a book by, I believe it's Martin Goldsmith, who also he wrote a book, also a very good book, also on the moon, and he actually goes into the 28 different phases again of the moon, which goes into much more detail. That's a really interesting book. I would also recommend that one largely as well. So lunar phases is also something that is rather important. So as we've been seeing here, so again, sign, speed, house, phase, aspects, moon strength, and void of course. Now this is a very interesting one about the moon, waxing and waning moons. For you people, look at your charts. So as it says, a waxing moon increasing. So when it's increasing in light from the new moon to the full moon, rejoices in a diurnal chart. A moon that is filling up with light resonates with these energies of the day. Whereas a waning moon, when it's decreasing in light, when it's moving from the full moon to the new moon, rejoices more in a nocturnal chart. A moon that is emptying herself of light is more in accordance with the energy of the night. So it's something, again, I would urge you to look at. Are you born in a waxing moon or waning moon? And is it waxing in a daytime chart or is it waxing in a nighttime chart? Very interesting. Really starts to say something. Now we move on to aspects. Paulus elaborates and says, just checking the time here. When did we start? Okay, I've got time. I think. Paulus elaborates that the specific range of degrees between the moon and the planets which she conjoins indicates the stage of a person's life when the effects of this aspect will occur. If the distance between them is less than 3 degrees, this aspect will manifest in youth. If the distance between them is between 3 to 7 degrees of life, it will be in the latter years. And if it is between 15 to 30 degrees, it will be something in old age. Now that is something to really take heed of and to look at that in your chart. What is the first planet that your moon makes aspects to? And I urge you to look at the first of the traditional planets, because for some of you, I'm sure the first aspect it's making is to Uranus or Neptune or Pluto. And I'm not saying to necessarily throw that away, because that does have a meaning in its own merit and its own context. But I would urge you to look at what is the first planet of the 7 major planets. Well, that will include the moon, so the rest 6, basically. What is the first planet out of the rest 6 that the moon is making aspects to? And it indicates, and what is the degree? Because if it was within 3 degrees, it would have been something whatever the energy of that planet represents, you would have met it early on in life if it was between 3 degrees to 7 degrees, or less than 3 degrees. If it was between 7 and 15 degrees, it would have been in the latter years. If it was 3 degrees or less, it would have been early in life. If it was between 3 and 7 degrees, it would have been in your prime years. If it was between 7 degrees and 15 degrees, it would have been in the latter years. And if it was between 15 and 30 degrees, it would be old age. So that's it. Again, four phases. So that's quite interesting to look at. It's something very, very, important to look at in the chart. So lunar applications and separations. It is very important to look at what is the last planet in your natal chart that the moon was making aspects to. And what is the next planet she's going to be looking at? Now, this is something that is very often that comes up in horary. And since the revival of horary astrology, in the 80s or somewhat, with the likes of Olivia Barclay and so on and so forth, and we've got people like Barbara Dunn and Sue Ward, and got some great horary astrologers out there. They've done wonderful works. They started to, and William Lilly was also somebody, again, who would always pay very close attention to the planet that the moon was separating from and the planet that the moon was going to. But this idea, it was something that was also a part of natal astrology. It was also used during the medieval astrologers as well. They used that concept and idea also as well. But the traditional astrologers also had this idea as well, at looking at the last planet, because what's happening is the moon is the storehouse, as I mentioned earlier on. The moon is kind of like the hard drive on a computer. And she's storing all of that information. When you open up your computer, what's on your desktop is more like your sun. That's the solar. That's the light. We can see what's all there on your main screen. Yes, but when you want to get into the files and go, into that deep memory, we want to go into the hard drive. That is the moon. So the moon is responsible for storing all our life's experiences, and she's putting them there. She's storing them, a little bit. It kind of reminds me of my father always used to say something about your mum. She just knows how to just, my dad will say, she'll go, oh yeah, but remember last year, June last year, you forgot that. Yeah. She'll bring it up. You know how mums are. They never forget. The dads are always just going about their business. Jumping from one thing to the next. But the women, they'll pull it up. Oh yeah, remember 1984? Yeah, that was it. Yeah, Sunday afternoon, that was it. On the 12th of January. They'll dig out the dates. And it's when I came into astrology, I thought, I think Dad's onto something here. But the principle is that the moon takes all of the experiences. It's quite interesting. When we are born, we have to remember within the first month of our birth, the moon has made every aspect to every planet in our chart. We've got the lunar return within that first month of her, and she's made every aspect to every planet in the chart. And it's quite interesting how that starts now to play out. So she stores it, when she makes aspect to Mercury, when she makes aspect to Venus. Yet nothing happens then. We're a baby. And what do we know? We're still hanging on to our mother's breast for food. We don't know. But what happens is she's storing it. She knows it's made an aspect to Mercury. She knows, and she's collecting it. Thank you very much. Aspect to Mercury, aspect to Venus, aspect to Saturn, aspect to Jupiter, and she's storing it. Don't worry. And when we look at our progress chart years later, we start to see things start unfolding when that moon comes back round again and starts to make aspects to those planets. Works like clockwork. One of the best predictive techniques I've ever used in astrology is the progressed moon. It works like a charm. To the date, you cannot miss it. And the progressions are based for every day after our birth, and every day will be equivalent to a year in our life. So 4 days after our birth will be 4 years. 10 days will be 10 years, and so on and so forth. So it's rather interesting to look at the planets that the moon is leaving and the moon is going towards. Also, the last planet that your moon made aspects to is telling you something that you possess. It's like a resource. It's food in a way. It possesses that energy of that planet. It's taken the energy of that planet, and the next planet that it's going towards is something that you may find that you are building or working towards throughout your life, that you're trying to attain and trying to get to. So look at the last planet that the moon is making aspect to, and look at the next planet, even if it's out of sign. Still look at it, and I'm talking about the 7 traditional planets, and look at the theme of your life. Is it going from a malefic to a benefic? Is it going from Saturn or Mars? Was it going towards Saturn or Mars? Is it leaving Saturn and going towards Jupiter? Watch the planets and watch how those planetary archetypes play out in your life. It's actually quite frightening. So, moon and sun, for example, you will often find there's a very strong father association, and a sense and a need to bring out one's individuality, one's life's mission. You will often find if the sun is sort of like, if it's leaving the sun, you will often find that this person has very strong solar qualities. If it's going towards the sun, you'll find that that's something that they're aspiring to, or they're moving towards. They want to get those solar qualities. They're constantly gravitating towards that sun. That's how it works with sun and moon. And very often there can be issues depending on the kind of aspect in and around father. Very often when there's sun and moon, it will often draw in strong experiences and circumstances around the parents, around the family, around mother and father, because the sun and moon is both mother and father. It's yin and yang. It's our needs versus our wants, and how is that collaborating? That's what we find when we have sun moon. So if we look here, for example, we can see this is the chart of Donald Trump. Now, it's clear to see that the next aspect that sun is going to make, that the moon is going to make, that the moon is going to make, is going to be towards the sun. And to put it on top, he's Leo rising. So, hey, I think that is something that is readily and easily seen. But look, the last planet that the moon is making. What is the last planet that the moon has made aspect to? Jupiter. Larger than life, a sense of entitlement, a sense of luck, wealth, perhaps. And you can use this in your own charts, and I use this with clients, and I'm telling you, draws start dropping, because the moon is now become, hence why I entitled it The Cosmic Oracle. She's telling us a story of where we are coming from and where it is that we are going. So the last aspect here that this moon is making is from Jupiter, and we can definitely see a Jupiterian influence. Jupiter, so it's going from Jupiter to the sun. Wonder why he's got that over I'm entitled, I deserve this. This kind of larger than life kind of character, Jupiter, going towards the sun, going towards something grand, this is how it will play out. this need for recognition, the need to be seen, is what is happening here. But we also have to take into account it's an opposition. One of the worst aspects in traditional astrology to have, because although it's the next aspect that it's making, it's so distant, it's 180 degrees apart. So it's far. There's something about it. It's almost like he's constantly trying to reach it, but not going to get it, or won't be satisfied, or there will be tensions, which are quite obvious. So this is the way, again, how to look at it. Moon Mercury is a quite interesting one. Moon Mercury can be situated around communication. Very often, if there's a Moon Mercury aspect in a chart, whether Mercury was the last planet or Mercury is the, if it's Mercury was the last planet to make aspect, very often there can be elements of communication. Very often they talked about you before having you. You know, I see it pop up over and over again. And I said to clients, oh, do you know if your mom? And they said, yes, they told me that they were really discussing it. It was, they wanted to have this baby. You'll often get things like that. There can often be situations around education, learning, writing. There can be situations around intelligence, sharp mind. Moon Mercury combinations are really great. People who have Moon Mercury very often have a very good mind and a very good memory. They can pull it up like no one's business. Telling you, it's the perfect one. So you will have the Moon Mercury. Moon Venus, very often there will be things in association with the arts. Sometimes there can be something of an artistic nature. Sometimes there can be things to do with beauty, relationships, sex. All the things that belong are bestowed to Venus. We will find Moon, Venus combinations, whether it's the last planet that she made aspects to, if it's the planet that if Venus is the planet that the Moon is making aspect, going towards, applying towards, then we will tend to find perhaps a Venusian quality that the person is gravitating towards, or perhaps maybe longing for, issues around love and pleasures. What we will find with Moon Venus. Moon Mars. Moon Mars is very interesting. You often get Moon Mars to do with the sex of the child. Sometimes you get that with Venus also as well. Venus and Mars, I often find there's often something associated with the sex of the child, but Mars especially. Very often when there's a Moon Mars, there's often a very strong they wanted a boy. Very often, they want the boy or want the sex of the child to be a boy because they want something potent and masculine. You see, there can be issues again depending on the kind of aspect. There can be issues sometimes that are connected maybe with wars, violence, and things of that nature. We know Mars sometimes can be a little bit. It would be better perhaps maybe in a nighttime chart if there is that kind of aspect. And again, you have to look at the houses as well in which that they are being aspected in also as well. But Moon Mars can be rather interesting. Moon Jupiter, as we saw with Donald Trump, it can be something of a luck, grandiose, maybe a lot of wealth, great opportunity. Again, depending what condition Jupiter's in also as well, and what house is in too. We can often find that. As we saw with Donald Trump's chart, the moon was also in Sagittarius, which is the sign that belongs to Jupiter. So essentially there's a reception there. Very, very helpful. And it was in the 5th house, the house of good fortune as well. So yeah. So Moon Jupiter can be very, very good, whether it's the last planet it was coming from or the one that it's going towards. Moon Saturn sometimes can be a bit difficult, as we're all aware of that, I'm sure. There can be something that's denied, blocked, inhibited sometimes, especially if it's leaving. I would rather a separating moon from Saturn than an applying one, to be quite honest. But it would also depend as well if it's a nighttime chart, daytime chart, what houses that it's happening to as well. But Saturn to Moon to Saturn as well can be a little bit heavy. Sometimes one can feel like they've been denied some kind of nurturing. There can be a great sense of tradition, responsibility, and things of that nature as well. There can be sometimes experiences that could be perceived as somewhat cold and heavy. You know, that's a Moon kind of Saturn kind of thing. We know that both of them they're not the best of friends, but something can be made out of it. It all depends. Moon Uranus, again, these are the outer planets. I do urge to look at, even if it's an outer planet that it's making aspect to first, look at the last traditional planet that it's making aspect to and incorporate that. But if you do have a Moon Uranus, sometimes that can be to do with some kind of eccentricity, something of a change, something of a difference. We know how there can be something spontaneity, some kind of spontaneity about the Moon in aspects to Uranus. Sometimes it can indicate or manifest as a mother who was somewhat unreliable, unsteady. You know, Moon Uranus very often has that. You know, Uranus can be a bit too erratic. You know, how astrologers have managed to weave Uranus being the ruler of Aquarius, when you know, Uranus is, you know, Aquarius is a fixed sign, but Uranus is anything but fixed. You know, it makes you wonder. But yeah, I digress. Moon Neptune, there can be a sense of wanting to merge, be at one with mother, strong idealisms. There can be strong, sometimes artistic nature, strong compassions, you know, eternal love, you know, so you know, that realm of fantasy is often very, very strong when we have Moon Neptune. And then we have Moon Pluto, and Moon Pluto, we know, brings that intensity, that transformation that we often find, you know, in a chart. Very often there can be hidden stuff with Moon Pluto. There can be a smothering nature of some sort, again, depending if it's leaving or going towards the Pluto. But and then we have Moon Chiron. Moon Chiron can be interesting. There can often be emotional wounds, elements of rejection. Sometimes you find that with the Pluto also as well. With you know, with Pluto. So here we have a chart again, looking at here again, looking at the first aspect. So we can see here again where it says S, that means it's separating. Where it says A, it's making you know, it's applying. So as we can see here, when we look at this chart, we can see here that there is a separating aspect from Venus. So what is that telling us about this person? Automatically, if I saw this chart, I would say there's something about relationships and about love and romance. You know, it's bringing, and it's a good Venus also as well. She's having some very troubled, hard aspects, including the one from the Moon. And she's also got the square there from Uranus also as well. So that's going to be, you know, we're talking about, if you really start putting all this together, it looks very, very shaky. Although there is something quite nice about that Venus, because yes, she is in Taurus, you know, she's in, you know, rulership of her own sign. She's not in the best of houses, let's face that. I am using whole sign system, by the way. The two house systems that I do use are Placidus and on whole sign, but I do tend to use whole sign, especially when I'm using particular traditional methods. So do forgive me if the chart does look somewhat different. But that Venus is in, she's in a good sign, but she's having a little bit of trouble in terms of aspects to her, and she's not necessarily in the best of houses. But the Moon, the last planet that Moon was making aspect to was to Venus. So automatically, the moment I see that, I will say, there's something about relationships here. And you're going to be carrying that energy. There's something about beauty, there's something about looks, there may be something of an artistic nature there, but I see. Now, what is the next planet that Moon is going towards? Well, many would say this Moon is void. Why? It's at 26 degrees of Aquarius. It's not going to make no more aspects to any other planet before it leaves that sign. Am I correct? Yes, I believe so. It's going to conjunct the node, but that's not a planet. So what's going to happen? The moon's going to go into Pisces. So what's the next planet she's going to make aspect to? The moment she moves into Pisces, what's the first planet she's going to make aspect to? It looks like it's going to be that Mars. So the traditional astrologers would have said, your moon is moving from Venus to Mars. If this is a daytime chart, people, Mars doesn't do so well in a daytime chart. He's very heated, can be a bit hot-headed, can be prone towards certain things. And then when we look at the houses that Mars rules, we see it rules the 5th house. Okay, that's a good house, house of children. Okay, so maybe not a problem there, or there could be, but it also rules the 12th, house of loss. So we clearly see where the life of this person could well have been heading, is it not? Moving from the Venusian energy and going towards a Mars energy. That moon is not void. Traditional astrologers gave up to 30 degrees and even out of sign. So that is not, it's actually with what, 6 degrees away, six and a half degrees away, but it's out of sign. So it's still in an aspect. However, it's an opposition. And it's in opposition to a planet that is not in set. So all of those things would need to be taken into consideration. So that's how we would definitely read that. Here is another chart, for example. I'm just looking at the time. I'm seeing I've gone over time here, so I'll quickly wrap it up. We've got the moon here. Look at this moon here in Virgo. What is the next aspect it's going to be made? Look, it's an opposition to Saturn. So the moment I look at this, I will say, okay, moon's in the 3rd house. It's a daytime chart, just about. The sun's just gone over the horizon. Some people would even debate that, but it's on anyway. It's a daytime chart as far as I'm concerned. But the moon is in the 3rd house. So she's in her house of joy. The moon is in her house of joy. However, she's coming to an opposition to Saturn. And it's a daytime chart, so he's part of the daytime team. So that's helpful. Okay, what kind of condition is Saturn in? He's in Pisces, a bit mucky, and he's retrograde. Yeah, okay. Right. So what we would say about this particular kind of person in terms of where they are coming from and where it is that they are going. Would it be fair to say that they're going towards a Saturnian kind of experience? Saturn in the 9th house, maybe to do with foreign travel, religious, political situations. There's going to be something about this person's life that is going to be 9th house orientated, Saturnian and 9th house orientated. But that's a simple way of putting it. There is the part of fortune there next to the moon. So the person probably does have some grace. So that's how essentially, again, we would read in terms of the speed, his moon is quite slow. So this is a chart of the Dalai Lama. And as we know from a very young age, and from the moment he's been elected as the Dalai Lama, he's been literally a fugitive. The moon rules fugitives, by the way, and he's happened to elope. I believe he resides still in India today, not allowed back in his hometown, which is quite interesting when we start looking at how this is playing out in his chart. What is this one? I think this is just another chart. It's just displaying the same thing, really. I think this is the chart of Arnold Schwarzenegger. Yeah, square. The first aspect it was making was a square to Neptune. But I believe in terms of the traditional planets, the first aspect it was going to make was to Mercury, I believe. No, sorry, Jupiter. That was it, Jupiter. Jupiter in the fifth. So the first aspect that the moon is going to make in terms of traditional planets was Jupiter in the fifth. So we can safely say something fifth house, right? When we look at the houses that Jupiter rules the sixth house, body of illness, disease, yeah, health, and the ninth, long distance traveling. Did he not travel? Did he not travel to, he was born in Austria, yeah, born in Austria, became a champion bodybuilder, then a movie superstar, yeah? Midheaven in Pisces, Jupiter, where is he? In the fifth? That's fit for a superstar any day. So look at your moons. Look beyond the sign and the aspects, but look at also what's the last aspect it made, what it's going towards. Because the moon is actually the storehouse of our life. She's letting us know what the quality of life essentially is going to be like. She's letting us know what planet could well be responsible for our fortune, depending what planet she's moving away from and what planet she's moving towards. And yes, there's always going to be a little bit of difficulty, you know, here and there. Nobody is exempt from that. But, you know, so there's always a way out. Okay. Up to 30 degrees out of sign aspects is what the traditionalists would have used. Unlike in horary, where they would look at moon or void, you know, if it's at the end of a sign, pretty much every 2.5 days. I did a talk with Chris Brennan on YouTube. Some of you may have seen it. Chris Brennan said last year in 2020, do you know how many times the moon was void? Once. Once during the whole year. But if we were looking at it from a horary perspective, the moon is void pretty much every 2.5 days, or at least 2 days or 2.5 days at some point, the moon will be void. So moon void in a natal chart, moon void in a horary chart is looked at as different in different ways. So for those of you who may feel that, oh, my moon is void, it may not be void. It's up to 30 degrees coming from or going towards, either way. Look at the story that the moon is trying to tell you. Our life story is there. Conception, how we were conceived, our conditions in the womb, what was happening when we were born, those early formal years, those first years of life are all lunar based. She lets us know the aspects that she's making, how close they are when we are going to meet those particular experiences, whether we're going to meet them in early life, if it's below 3 degrees, if it's between 3 and 7 degrees, it's going to be in the prime years. If it's between 7 and 15, it's going to be in the latter years. And if it's between 15 degrees and 30 degrees, we're going to meet that experience much later in life. The moon is the oracle of our life that displays who and what we are. Without her, well, without any planet, I suppose we'd be nowhere, but especially with the moon.